Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us, and welcome to today's virtual demo. Let's get physiological, non-invasive intraoperative monitoring basics. I'm Sydney Otamanchek from the events team at scientist.com, and I'm happy to be your host for today's event. Our speaker today is Dr. Kathy Garner, a technical resource scientist at Kent Scientific, where she focuses on helping researchers utilize Kent Scientific's products to optimize their own experiments. Before I welcome Kathy to the floor, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping notes to help you all get the most out of your experience today. First, have a look at the interactivity panel at the right of your screen with 4 tabs: chat, Q&A, polls, and handouts. We want this to be an interactive experience for you, so please send in your questions, thoughts, and comments using the Q&A tab, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can at the end of the demo today. When a question is added into the Q&A panel, you can upvote the question to increase its position on my list by clicking a thumbs up button underneath it. This is always helpful so I know which questions to address first. You can also explore some links and documents in the Handouts tab to learn more. Lastly, if you're having any technical issues, please try refreshing your browser first and ensure that you're using Google Chrome to access this event, as it is the most stable browser. If you're still having trouble after you refresh, you can use the private chat function to communicate with me, and I'll help you to troubleshoot. Just before we begin with the presentation, we'd like to get to know you in the audience a little better with a couple of polls. Our first poll for today: what physiological parameters do you currently monitor during your surgeries? So there are multiple options here, and you can select as many as you'd like. So your options are heart rate, pulse oximetry, blood pressure, ECG, temperature, and/or end-tidal CO2. So I'll give everyone a moment here to start submitting your answers. And again, it is helpful for us to know what everyone in the audience does in your own lab. Okay, wonderful. Seeing all those results coming in, looks like temperature and heart rate are the top listed, so that's great. Okay, and now our second poll question is similar. What physiological parameters are you most interested in monitoring during your surgeries? So same options. Again, you can select all that apply. This time it's what you're most interested in monitoring: heart rate, pulse ox, blood pressure, ECG, temperature, and end-tidal CO2. So let us know. You may not be monitoring them currently in your lab, or you may be, but it's what you're most interested in studying in your animals. Wonderful. Okay, and while we are still collecting those responses, again, if you missed either of those polls, the polls tab is open. You can go ahead in there and participate. So thank you again, and without any further delay, I'm going to bring Kathy on. Hi, Kathy, take it away.
Hi, thank you for that introduction, Sydney, and as always, thank you all in the audience for attending. Today, we will be going over a very brief, very basic introduction on how non-invasive monitoring can be used in your procedures with a focus on Kent Scientific offerings. I also wanted to thank all of y'all for completing those polls. They will be available during the entire duration of this presentation. This is a brand new presentation that we decided to make in part due to customer feedback. So having this information is very helpful for us to make sure we are continuing to meet your needs and your experimental goals. Right, so let's move right on to the fun parts. So before we really get into the meat of this presentation, I do want to clarify what I mean when I refer to a procedure. During this presentation, I'm going to be biased towards survival procedures where you need your animal to wake up after. The biggest one is going to be surgery. So I'll probably be using surgery interchangeably with procedure a lot of the time, but it's by no means the only procedure, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are also plenty of times where you may need monitoring for terminal procedures. Your animal is going to benefit from intraoperative monitoring anytime they're anesthetized, independent of procedure type or anesthetic used. So during these procedures, there are several reasons why you may want to monitor your vital signs, the biggest of which is going to be the overall quality of care and your animal welfare. Intraoperative monitoring contributes to the 3 Rs primarily by refining procedures. When they are sufficiently refined, we ultimately get reduction of the amount of animals we need, as well as our experimental variables. Pretty much, we don't need to repeat the experiment because it went right the first time. For example, if we are performing a surgery and we notice one animal's heart rate dropping below an acceptable amount, we can start resuscitation and potentially even take them off the study. It can also help determine experimental endpoints or ensure our data goals are met. For example, if I have an animal that I gave a lung injury to and I see an increased end-tidal carbon dioxide, that might mean my procedure was successful and I can continue this animal on my experiment. That being said, non-invasive monitoring is great. It can help out with a lot of your aims, but it's not going to be appropriate all the time. There are a lot of different procedures with so many different experiments and so many different variables that could contribute to your overall monitoring protocols. We do ultimately recommend consulting both your established protocols as well as your institutional veterinary staff for additional information. For example, if I need to take tail clips under anesthesia, it's a brief procedure and maybe physiological monitoring doesn't make sense. So if my vet clears me not to monitor heart rate or SpO2, maybe for this particular procedure, I don't check it. Non-invasive monitoring in itself does have specific challenges where it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And in some cases, you may need to consider more traditional methods. For example, while you may be able to confirm an animal is hypoxic after administering nitrogen with a pulse oximeter, you may need blood gas analysis to ultimately determine how a genetic manipulation contributes to its recovery. Furthermore, our vital signs are going to vary between species. I, a human, am going to have different vital signs than my dog, who is going to have very different vital signs than the birds at the park, who are all going to have very different monitoring signs from the lizards just hanging out on the side of my house. At Kent Scientific, we do focus on small laboratory rodents. While some of our systems are transferable to other mammals, that is a longer conversation you'll want to have with us. Since we do focus on animals such as mice and rats, they are going to be where I'm focusing the bulk of this presentation. So, how are mice and rats different from needing to monitor vital signs in humans? We're both mammals. We're going to have a lot of the same ultimate goals in our monitoring, but there are a lot of differences that make it more challenging to monitor these vital signs in rodents. First of all, there is some normal variance in vital signs, even between members of the same species. The example I like to use, one of my friends is a competitive distance runner. So he had a respiratory virus recently, and he was showing me the trend line on his Fitbit for his resting heart rate. And he was like, oh my gosh, look at how high it's getting. It's going up. The highest reach was like my normal resting heart rate. So even between members of the same species, we're different sex, we have different cardiovascular activity levels. He had a virus, I did not. So even that same parameter, it was still within a normal human range, but it wound up having that variance between the two individuals. We're going to see a similar thing with lab animals. A male Sprague dolly is not going to be directly comparable to a female C57, but both of them are still going to have relatively comparable, for example, high heart rates compared to humans. Rodents also are going to be a little warmer than humans, due in part to a higher metabolic rate. Essentially, terrestrial mammals are going to be around the same core body temperature, but it's going to take more energy for a smaller animal to maintain a relatively high temperature. Adapting equipment designed to monitor human vital signs doesn't always work when we're looking at small animals and small rodents. For example, the equipment may be physically too large. It may not be sensitive enough, or it might just not even be prepared to measure rates outside the human standard. So, for example, human heart rate at its highest is still lower than many rodents' heart rates. So, if my equipment isn't looking for something in the 600s, it might just not pick it up. There's also the problem of variances in the size of surgical suites. Some of us get a nice, lovely, large suite where we can fit our entire vivarium staff and all of the equipment we need. Some of us do have basically enough room for our vaporizer, our surgeon, and our animals. Finding space for additional monitoring can be a challenge in those instances. Furthermore, if we are using multiple pieces of equipment, we're training multiple personnel on multiple equipment, which does increase the rate of human error. Kent Scientific offers solutions for several of these common problems. The biggest solutions is having up to 3 physiological monitoring modules in one small controller. If it can fit on my small, messy desk, it'll be perfect in your perfectly organized surgical suite. It is also directly adapted for small rodents. So it will take the same proof of concept we use for monitoring human physiology, but we adapt it so it is more compatible for small laboratory animals. We do have a few options depending on your needs, primarily the Somna Suite and Physio Suite. I did just say 3 modules, but technically with the Somna Suite, we can go up to 5. The 2 biggest differences between the Somno Suite and the Physio Suite is going to be the Somno Suite is a anesthetic vaporizer, so you can go ahead and use it to deliver your anesthetic as well. And it also has the option of working as a ventilator. Little bit of a caveat because there is always an exception to the rule. Some older physio suites do have the capability of being a ventilator, so physio suites, they're going to be 3 to 4. Newer ones will not have the ventilator option, but it is completely possible if you have an older or a refurbished physio suite, you can use it as a ventilator. Other than those modules, you can add modules for pulse oximetry and end-tidal capnography to either the Somna Suite or Physio Suite, and both of them will come with our homeothermic warming module. We do also offer junior versions of some of these modules, depending on what you're looking for. I'm not really going to be focusing on the junior ones today because they are just scaled down versions of the larger system. So a lot of the same information is going to be applying to them. But we do have many different options to suit your needs. And going forward, I will be focusing on the big 3 modules that are shared between systems. So they're going to be warming, pulse oximetry, and end-tidal capnography. Of course, this is a non-exhaustive list of all the physiological parameters you can monitor, and we do encourage you to look at literature and consult with your veterinary staff to see if there's anything else to consider monitoring for improved animal welfare. Our ultimate goal here is to make sure your animals are at the best quality of welfare they can be. So starting out, we're going to start out with our homeothermic temperature monitoring module, the right temp. And so warming is so important. We have an entirely separate webinar to address it. So if you want more information on this, there is a 30-minute webinar available on Kent Scientific's YouTube channel. Why is it so important? Anesthesia induces hypothermia. This is a normal response to the drug, and it is maintained across different classes of anesthetics. Those data on the right come from guinea pigs anesthetized with ketamine xylazine, but we do see inhalant anesthetics induce hypothermia, and it happens in a variety of species. Again, it is a totally normal response to anesthetic. Unfortunately, hypothermia can cause a variety of imbalances in animal physiology. When you keep an animal warm, you compensate for that off-target effect. So when you're compensating for that off-target effect, you help maintain other physiological parameters. So for example, if you're noticing low blood fusion in your extremities, again, normal. If an animal is hypothermic, even slightly, it'll vasoconstrict to keep blood in the core. But if you are noticing that low blood perfusion in the extremities, the only thing you might need to do is warm your animal up a bit. So while there are a variety of ways to keep your animals warm during procedures, I'd like to go over what sets the Kent Scientific warming apart from other systems. The two things that are going to be unique to the right tip system is going to be its use of infrared warming, which has a variety of other benefits just on its own, as well as the system's use of homeothermic warming. So homeothermic warming, it is going to raise or lower the actual temperature of the pad to maintain your animal at a set core temperature. So, for example, if you have a lot of draping, that's physical insulation. Maybe the pad doesn't need to warm up as much. On the other hand, if you need to be in a lot of protective equipment for whatever reason, maybe your surgical suite is a little cooler to keep humans comfortable. I've had to do double disposable gowns before. They get very warm very quickly. So if you have your AC on and your animal is just getting a little cooler because the room's cooler, the pad will increase the temperature in order to keep your animal at the same core temperature. And moving right along, let's talk about another one of our popular offerings, the Mousestat pulse oximetry module. So the Mousestat module uses the same principles of human pulse oximetry, but adapted to the unique needs of rodents. Pulse oximetry is a super elegant process that takes advantage of heme absorbing and reflecting light differently depending on how bound blood oxygen is to it. So when less light is absorbed, the blood is less oxygenated. I do want to shout out the website How Equipment Works. It is cited at the bottom right of my slide, and it is a fantastic resource for more of the technicalities related to pulse ox. We take these underlying concepts and we fine-tune our algorithm to compensate for rodent physiology. So for example, higher heart rate, though, that blood is going to be coming and going from a site more quickly. We've also designed those clip-free sensors that will attach to your animal hind paw. So either mouse or rat, right on that hind paw. So we're monitoring without needing to do an entirely separate procedure to implant monitoring equipment. And of course, we all know that the better our signal is, the better our data are. So the Mousestat has a few ways to confirm your signal and data are both good. The perfusion index is going to tell us how much light is being absorbed at a particular site. If your sensor is in the right place and you have enough circulation, that perfusion is going to be closer to 1. For anesthetized animals, it's good enough as long as that value is 0.5, but we do kind of see variations where we've seen acceptable data with lower readings, but 0.5 is going to be what we're looking for to confirm your signal is good. The oxywave you see displayed on the screen is reflective of how oxygenated and deoxygenated blood is absorbing light. So as blood is coming and going from a site, you're going to have different values of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, and you get that nice little sine wave. If you don't have enough circulation at the site, for example, in a hypothermic animal, that perfusion is going to be low, and that oxywave, it isn't going to be our nice, pretty sine wave. So we're able to determine how good our signal ultimately is. None of this information is EKG. It is not related to the actual activity of the heart. It is purely related to the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood at the site. It's also at the particular site. So if you're noticing poor signal in one site, you can move it to a different site, and maybe that's just a little bit better signal to get a little bit better readings. With the mouse stat, you also have the option to add on respiratory rate monitoring. There is an artifact in the Oxawave that is going to correlate with respiration. You don't usually see it in the displayed Oxawave, but it is there, and the system is able to use it to calculate respiratory rate. It does require a strong signal, and it is calculated. So you don't always see the exact same number as, for example, if you set a ventilator to deliver a certain respiratory rate, but it is often sufficient to confirm your animal is in a acceptable respiratory rate range. And last but not least, we have our end-tidal capnography module, the CapnoScan. So end-tidal capnography lets us know how much carbon dioxide an animal is exhaling. Our capnograph takes advantage of different gases absorbing different wavelengths of infrared light. So if more infrared is getting absorbed, there's a higher amount of exhaled carbon dioxide. If you know you're delivering your anesthetic gas in a certain carrier, such as pure oxygen, we can also program the system to compensate for that. Our capnograph is also a side stream sensor, which means you can pull a small sample of exhaled gases and get highly accurate data. So some of you may be wondering how end-tidal capnography is going to be different than pulse ox, since, well, aren't we going to be getting a lot of the same data? And yes, you are. You are going to find out if the animal is hypoxic or not with either end-tidal capnography or pulse oximetry. However, you get some different information from either system, and sometimes one is going to fit your experiment better than the other. It's similar to doing both immunohistochemistry and a Western blot. Both of them are going to tell you if a protein is upregulated, but maybe one suits your needs better, or your experiments benefit from having both to support each other. End-tidal capnography is going to provide instantaneous information about how effectively carbon dioxide is being cleared by the system, how effectively carbon dioxide is being transported in the respiratory system, and if a treatment is working as expected. For example, if you are delivering supplemental oxygen, you'll be able to see if it's working more quickly than you would with pulse oximetry. You're going to get a lot of this data in pulse oximetry, but pulse ox is going to focus on oxygenation of a particular tissue. So maybe my animal isn't hypoxic, but I just ligated a vessel. So when I ligated my blood vessel, I've cut off circulation to the area. It's going to show that the site's hypoxic, even though my animal is not. When you're using them together, capnography and pulse oximetry should support each other. So if I see a SpO2 of around 80 and end-tidal CO2 of 10%, that helps confirm my animal is hypoxic. The big challenge we see for end-tidal capnography is that you need constant ventilation. So with animal models, this does mean the animal has to be on a ventilator. If I know my animals don't need a ventilator, and I know that I don't necessarily need instantaneous carbon dioxide, or if I know my oxygenation at a particular site or tissue is enough, maybe I just need to use pulse oximetry for my particular experiment. Features for accuracy in our CapnoScan include that real-time data display. You will be getting the minimum CO2, the peak CO2 exhaled, as well as a waveform that should roughly line up with your animal's breathing patterns. So when we have this in front of us, we can look at it, we can compare it to our procedure, to our known data, and say, hey, my animal isn't breathing quite right. What can I do? Do I need to do resuscitation efforts? Do I need to deliver supplemental oxygen? Do I need to dial something down? Make those adjustments in real time as you need them to ensure your animal is really responding to your procedure appropriately. So, of course, we did not go over every vital sign that can be monitored during procedures. Often, your procedure type and experimental end goals determine which physiological monitoring is going to be best for you. I briefly went over some examples when discussing each of these points, but it really does only scratch the surface. There is so much more we can really go in depth on to help determine what's best for you, what's best for your animals, what's best for your particular procedures. And of course, Kent Scientific is happy to help. We will be having a brief question and answer session now, but if you have any additional questions that were not answered during this presentation or we didn't get to you in the Q&A, please reach out. We do really want to make sure your goals are met and that we're doing everything we can to help determine what is best for you, your animals, and your experiments. Thank you.
Thank you for that fantastic demo, Kathy.
Of course.
Just before we do jump into that Q&A session, I will give you a second to catch your breath. Maybe if you need a little bit of water, go right ahead.
Fantastic.
Great. And I do have 2 more polls for our audience. So our next question for you, which anesthetic do you usually use? So let us know if you use isoflurane, sevoflurane, or injectable anesthesia in your lab. And while you are answering that, I did want to draw your attention to the handouts tab again. There are some great resources in there to help you learn more about the monitoring systems that Kathy presented today. So we've got a few handouts in there with some great information for you all. Wonderful. And as expected, isoflurane is the most popular, with injectable coming second. Wonderful. Okay, thank you again for participating in these polls. Our very last poll for today is monitoring SpO2 or heart rate part of your institution's standard of care requirements? So yes, no, or depends on protocol for this one. Okay, and lastly, if you do have to pop off early, you can, of course, submit your question in the Q&A tab right now. However, we also have a survey for you to let us know your thoughts on today's event, as well as there is a spot if you did have your question and you'd like to submit it in there. Kent Scientific will get back to you with a response. Okay. Let's see. Great. All right, thank you so much again. Without any further delay, I'm going to bring Kathy back in. Okay, welcome back. Thanks again.
Still
for
here.
That. Yeah, good. Thanks again for that wonderful presentation.
Yes, of course.
Let's get right into the questions. So the first one was wondering why the basal body temperature was showing around 39.5 degrees Celsius.
Is there a specific slide that
I think it was around...
Oh, for the guinea pig?
Perhaps.
So I don't know a guinea pig body temperature off the top of my head, but it might be just the species. Yeah, because everyone is starting at the same place. So I think it's anything from how exactly they were monitoring the temperature to it's a normal species difference. Yeah, so like I said, these are not data Kent Scientific produced, so I don't know exactly like how they were doing everything. It was rectal temperature, but yeah, that's one. It's anything from normal temperature to a guinea pig to they had a rectal probe in a little too deep. So yeah, that data was not for mouse, which we would expect to be closer to 38.
Okay, perfect. The next question is curious how you export the data to a computer. I believe this was for the second topic you were talking about.
Okay, yeah. So both the Somna Suite and Physio Suite are going to be compatible with ADI Lab Chart. You can also export data into any system that can read, and I'm not a computer person, so this is going to not get pronounced correctly, but it's ASCII, C as in cat, S as in subpoena, I as in ice twice. That text format, I'm probably misspelling it off the top and mispronouncing it, but it will be exportable if you have something that can read that data string. There is a setting where you can export data in either real time or once it is saved to a internal storage in either the Somna suite or the Physio suite, you can then export it at a later time. We do have a longer data management guide for more information. Our systems are only Windows compatible. So if you're looking to export data to a Mac, not yet.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Pretty simple. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. Can you use the mouse stat in conscious animals?
That is a little bit of a debate. Theoretically, it's possible to use the mouse stat in a conscious, appropriately restrained animal, but there's sort of a debate in the larger scientific community if you can even measure pulse oximetry in an awake animal. So we do recommend anesthesia will give you the cleanest readings. In awake animals, it has to do with their reflexes. So you get what we call a movement artifact. The movement artifact, the system can't always distinguish from the real pulse ox data. So you may or may not get as accurate data in a conscious animal. Like I said, it's a larger discussion happening in the scientific community. So I'm going to say possible, but you might not get the data you want to see.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Are there ways to set up for 2 animals at once?
Not yet. Yeah. All of these are really designed to have a one-to-one system to animal monitoring. Yeah.
Okay. Are these systems MRI safe?
Mostly as long as you tell us you need it to be MRI safe. So with the warming pad, those do have metal components in them. So those cannot go in a MRI. With the pulse ox sensors, we do have some longer cables to help compensate for needing additional distance in that MRI. And the clips themselves have no metal components. So they are always going to be MRI compatible. The CapnoScan is a little bit more difficult. That's considered a custom application to make it MRI safe. We do have on our adapter, it is a like standard injectable needle that takes our sample. So I don't know that material off the top of my head, but we can sometimes make some of the cables for the CapnoScan longer, as long as the actual sample needle is considered MRI safe. So warming, no. Mouse stat, yes. CapnoScan, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great breakdown. Thanks
Yeah.
for summarizing at the end there. Okay. Is there a better way to monitor respiratory rate?
It depends on what exactly you're looking for. Every way to monitor respiratory rate in a spontaneously breathing animal is going to have its shortcomings. So if I'm just watching my chest rise and fall, maybe it's subtle and maybe I miss it. If I'm using my mouse stat and it's just not a strong enough signal or it's not catching the artifact exactly correctly, it also might underestimate. So really for measuring respiratory rate, really the best thing you're going to want to do is use a ventilator and know that respiratory rate is going to be consistent. And like,
Okay.
again, that's something that you can consult with your veterinary staff because it's totally possible they have a nice tried and true method of looking at everything. And they're like, yes, this works every time. You should do this. So I think, like I said, every method is going to have its pros. It's going to have its cons. It's going to have its shortcomings. That's definitely something that I would address in further with my veterinary staff.
Okay. Fantastic. Let's see. Is a computer necessary to use these
No,
systems?
no, all of them are pretty much self-contained computers on their own. So if you don't need data export and you just need to look at your vital signs during your procedure, you can do it as long as you have a power outlet and can look at them while you're monitoring. But no, you do not need any separate computer or other equipment other than what we would provide you.
Oh, that's great,
Yeah.
especially if someone does use Macs in their lab.
Yeah.
They
Or
could
if
do
you
it
were
this
like
way.
me and you could barely fit one person in a tiny surgical suite. Oh god, the days where we had to have people observing surgeries was the worst because I have elbowed so many trainees. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Um, okay, you did mention we had a question earlier about measuring only one
Mhm.
animal. I don't know if that was part of the warming pad, but could you use the warming pad for more than one animal, or that is also single?
So it depends on how you're using the warming pad. So in homeothermic warming, the way we have it programmed, it's really going to be monitoring one animal with one sensor. There are ways, you have options where you don't need to use homeothermic warming. So you can use it as a standard warming pad and keep multiple animals on that. But for homeothermic warming, we really don't have a good way to monitor more than one animal on the same pad quite yet.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah.
Another question about warming. Does the right temp module work using a rectal probe that feeds back core
Yep.
temp?
Yep. Yep. So the way the warming system works, and like I said, we do have an entirely separate presentation on monitoring. The presenter, I think, is pretty okay. It was me. I think I'm hilarious. But yes, the way the feedback system works is you have your pad, you have a sensor on your pad, you have your animal on top of that sensor, and then you have a rectal probe in your animal. So the rectal probe will feed to the controller, and then the controller will adjust the measured pad temperature based on the animal's core temperature.
Excellent. That's great. Um, and then part two of this person's question, is the ventilator in the Somno suite pressure or volume controlled?
It is pressure controlled. You do have the option of delivering a set tidal volume, but because it is a pressure based ventilator, we do sometimes see weird things happening in volume priority. Doesn't always happen. I'm biased towards getting support tickets of when it's not quite working correctly, but it is really designed to maintain a set pressure in the lungs.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Is the heating element, the far infrared heating throughout the entire pad?
Yeah, so it is throughout the entire pad, but because infrared is going to work by exciting water molecules, you're going to get the most accurate warming in that place where your animal is. So if I have my animal on top of the center of the pad, the corner is still going to get warm. And if I press on it hard enough, I'll feel it getting warmed. But because my water molecules are getting excited in the center, that's where my heat is going to be concentrated.
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Mhm.
much. Um, Somebody is wondering if they needed technical assistance. How would they go about getting that?
So, couple of ways to get technical assistance, including the information currently on this slide. So that is the number to our helpline. You might not always get the person on the other end might need to redirect you to technical support, and it might be a little bit of delay until you get a call back. Email, that is my direct email, as well as the general support email, where once we see it, we will respond to you and make sure you get that support you need. And We do sometimes request pictures of setup. We do sometimes request additional details just to make sure everything's clear and we're providing you with the best information we can.
Okay, wonderful. Very simple and
Yeah.
straightforward.
Yep.
Let's see here. All of your products, I'm assuming, all of your systems work well in rodents that
Mhm.
have some sort of um, multiple different kinds of conditions. Is
Mhm.
there anything that it is too obscure that it can't measure?
Not that we've found yet. Like I said, there are certain case by case bases. Like for example, the big one I used to do surgery on animal hind limbs, so maybe the mouse stat wouldn't be right for that particular procedure because I would be manipulating that hind limb, but it also might be fine if it was just on the other limb. So
Right.
too obscure is going to be on a case by case basis. The one thing, your fun fact of the day, the mouse stat will not work correctly on birds because their circulatory systems are just so different from mammals. You can't take that application and use it in that species.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's anyone's
Yeah.
question, but it is your fun fact of the day.
And what would the largest animal be that you could measure? I know you showed a guinea pig
Yeah.
in
So
the
the
one
guinea
slide.
pigs that we showed in this, they were not ours. They were not something we have tested. We do have large animal sensors that I don't know that weight limit off the top of my head, but I would say generally, if your animal is under 1 kilogram, you can use our system even if it is modified. Generally, there's always going to be someone with the exception that breaks the generality. Yeah, I would say as long as they're under 1 kilogram, so that would include mice, rats, guinea pig, hamster.
Would rabbits be included?
Rabbits, I think, are a little too large. I
Okay.
think shoot us an email for that because I would want to check some of our files to see if we have information from customers who have used the system in rabbits.
Right. And
Yeah.
then perhaps even obese animals may may
How
tip the
obese are we
scale.
talking? How
Yeah.
obese are we talking? Like I said, usually, like I said, the kilogram is going to be the limit where I would say if it's under that, probably good. Over
Yeah.
that, talk to us because like even in an obese animal, if you're doing like fatty sucker rat where they get large, that fat doesn't always go to their feet. It goes to their abdominal
Absolutely.
pelvic organs. So if they have around the same foot size as your control animal, you might still be able to use it for monitoring.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, we do have one last question. However, if other people think of anything while we're finishing up, go ahead, submit them, and they will be passed on to Kathy and the
Yep.
Kent team, or you can submit them in that survey that I was mentioning earlier. So, our very last question, what about dark-skinned animals? Does it still work?
Yep. Works fine in dark skinned animals. I know there's like there's a discussion in human physiology about use of pulse oximetry in different skin tones. We have not found any data that suggest our monitoring works differently in darker animals.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. Great news.
Yeah.
Okay, we have reached basically the end of our time. Kathy, really great job
Thank
today with
you.
the demo and answering all these questions. Thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure speaking with y'all.
Have a great day. All right. And I also want to thank our live audience. We know how busy your schedules are, so we do really appreciate you being here live, and I hope you enjoyed your experience today. In closing, we hope you enjoyed this Inside Scientific virtual demo produced in partnership with Kent Scientific, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.